So today we're talking about social VR, which is a pretty ambiguous topic, if you ask me. I mean, if we were to have a whole panel on social media, what the hell would we talk about? It's something that is much broader than people talk about it. But the objective really is to take all the buzz about VR, and everybody's talking about the metaverse. What is this Oasis type experience that people have and have read about in sci-fi novels like Ready Player One? But to think about how VR headsets like the Rift and the Gear are really changing the way that we interact with one another. So really quickly, let me introduce you guys. This is James McCrae of Janus VR's, Philip Rosedale of High Fidelity, formerly founder of Second Life, Eric Romo of AltspaceVR, and Tony Parisi. He created VRML, which some of you OGs might remember in the 90s, and also is working at WEVR now. But audience, okay, quick question. How many of you are on Facebook? Okay, I would expect. How many of you are on Facebook right now? Okay. But how many of you are on Snapchat? The younger hands in the audience go up. Okay, interesting. All right, how many of you have tried a social VR application? Yeah? Okay. How many of you tried it for more than an hour? All right. How many of you have tried it, but it wasn't quite what you expected? Okay. How many of you have an idea for what you would do if you were to build a social VR experience? All right. Save those hands. I might have you pitch in a second. So social VR, it's really broad. Give me your definition of social VR right now.
Me?
Sure.
Social VR, if you were to just give a rote definition, would just be the idea of two or more people putting on VR headsets and maybe being physically separated, but being together in the same virtual space. I could talk about it briefly from the context of my own software, where people are coming together, and these spaces are URLs or actual locations on the web. So the context of a social VR experience is somewhat defined by the location that they meet. So it's very much an element of the experience.
What about you, Philip?
Well, I mean, obviously you can use VR technology for a few different things, but one of them is that you can put two people in a room together, or many people in a room together, and that, I agree, it's kind of silly to say it's like social VR as if there were some app where we're all going to chat in some described way to each other, and that's going to be like Facebook or something. That's a social network. But this idea of social VR, I think, as you say, is incredibly broad, because it's just that if we can put people in a room together like this, using technology, then of course it opens up all this other stuff, I guess, beyond the first things that we might imagine experientially with headsets. So yeah, it's huge.
So how are you approaching social VR right now with High Fidelity?
Well, I mean, it's an integral piece of the couple of magic things that we're trying to do with our software. One of them is put people face to face put people face to face together. But like, for example, I think the ability to interact with the environment with those other people is a solid requirement for what comes next. So just doing sort of a chat roulette or something with headsets on is not,
right.
I mean, that's not. It's not worth spending a whole bunch of conference time talking about.
So what is next then, Eric, Tony? What's social VR in 3 to 5 years? Once we have people in there face to face, check mark, we accomplished that. What does it become in 3 to 5 years?
What we're really focused on, and we think the long-term potential of this is really about the emotional connection between people. And so I think there's stuff that you can do now with the headsets that are available and the tracking technology that's available, and it's going to get blown away by what's going to come in 3 to 5 years, as far as how much can you really make a person feel like they're there with that other person, because that connection, I mean, it's just, I was thinking about this the other day. There's so much hardship we endure in life just to be around other people, right? And I once flew to Santiago, Chile for a 90-minute meeting. It's 24 hours each way for a 90-minute meeting, right? And just because being in that room with those people, who, by the way, the meeting was in Spanish, and I speak Spanish like a kindergartner, but just being there was so important. Looking them in the eye was so important that I think social VR can really start to alleviate some of those pains for a lot of different people, a lot of different walks of life.
So what's holding us back from having that true experience that you kind of crave? Tony, is input the main issue? What is it that's holding us back right now?
Well, first I'm going to say I'm probably the odd man out on this panel. I'm the only person not actively involved in primarily user-generated content kind of virtual world at the moment, though I've built systems like that before, so I can speak with some level of experience on it. There are many issues holding us back, and I'd love to have the other panelists sort of jump in on specifics here, but a bunch of design issues on human factors to get good avatars working, including input. That's a big one. The infrastructure behind these experiences to experience in real time over today's networks, huge. People on this panel are solving those. And then giving folks out there, normal folks like us, the tools to express ourselves in VR, to make those things we're doing meaningful, so that we're not just sitting together watching a Netflix movie together, which is a cool use case for social VR, but we're actually experiencing something together that some of us have built and said, you look at Minecraft in terms of the social aspect of that, like, look at this stuff I've built, right? So giving people tools like that. So it's actually a host of these issues that the other folks on the panel are solving today.
So what are you guys seeing? Any of you? As the main problems that you're coming up across?
I mean, I think it's data right now, to be totally candid. I mean, there's so few people that have access to these technologies, that there's so few people that are using them, that the tests that we can run, the experiments we can run, the data that we can get about what people really do find emotionally appealing and what they don't is really lacking. I mean, I think there's a trend in our industry that because there's no data, we just sort of decide what we think is right for the user. And I think longer term, what wins in all software development is getting out and testing things and finding out what actually wins. And I think that's going to start to change, which is great with the advent of hardware actually shipping. And I think we're all hopeful that the data sets go up.
Yeah, both our companies have experimented with eye tracking, for example. One thing I'd say about the sense of presence is that there isn't a silver bullet. It's really interesting. I found that fascinating. I kind of came into it thinking like, we're going to get one thing just exactly right, and we're going to just dial that up, and that'll kind of carry the sensation of being in a space with somebody else. Now, after a couple years working on it, I would say that there's no one thing. You turn on and off the eye tracking, it's there, but you don't suddenly have this, supernatural, oh my God, it's finally working experience. That said, I think the first generation headsets with voice are very compelling at conveying a lot of information between people that we haven't had the ability. The simple fact, well, I think the hand controllers are necessary, which is I really think the hand controllers are necessary for human communication to kind of work, But the first generation stuff that does have hand tracking, I think, is good enough to allow us to communicate with each other very effectively in ways that's profoundly different than Skype.
Right. I mean, I hugely agree. I mean, if you take the idea of social VR to its logical limit, where you have an experience that's completely indistinguishable from me interacting with you right now, and all that sense of presence and being able to see each other, we're obviously a long way off, both in terms of the hardware and the software side, if all these problems are solvable at all. But just to embed a gyroscope and an accelerometer or something into an HMD, you have this basic idea to lean, move, look around. It's such a small approximation of one's complete physical being, but it conveys a lot.
Let's talk about that. Like, is it a full avatar that's needed for it to be social VR? I mean, you have things like Oculus Social. Have any of you guys tried Oculus Social on like Gear VR or anything? So it's very simple. You're just in a room watching Vimeo or Twitch, and you have heads, right? And you get the head nods. Converge is another company that hasn't put anything more than an avatar head. Do you need a realistic avatar to have true immersion in social VR?
Well, I think it takes advantage of the extra dimensionality afforded by virtual reality, that you have a physical space. Why would you not want a physical body? In terms of how we communicate, I mean, talking on the phone or writing someone a letter in the mail are very abstract forms of communication, but they are still communication. They're still social in some sense. So why would you not want to leverage all that's good about VR, the idea of having fully realized spaces, and not do as much as you can for that medium? So it seems like the logical conclusion to me. But
what do you guys think? I mean, Philip, you're doing with Second Life people saw it was kind of realistic, but not really. High fidelity, you go more cartoony. Eric, you have robots right now as your avatars. What do you guys think about the whole avatar?
I mean, I can say we started from sort of the place where if you remember, there's this I forget what it is, canonical study of how many dots do you need to represent a human with for you to know it's a human walking versus know it's a horse walking versus know it's a whatever other animal. And that's sort of the direction that we started with, is what's the minimum set that's required to show for you to know that that's a person over there. And I think I've been personally, I guess, constantly surprised by how well those have performed. So, a round shape with two eyes, if it's tracked in 6 degrees of freedom, and you can see that it's the head moving back and forth, you know there's a person there. There's no mistaking there's a person. Two Vive controllers floating in the air as I gesticulate, you know that those are my hands. It's very obvious it's a person talking with their hands. And so that's kind of the direction that we started, and we're very slowly kind of incrementing down the path of how much do we want to add and where does it start to break and become uncanny valley versus it's additive to the experience. But we definitely started way on the left side towards the vertical axis there.
Yeah, I don't personally think you need a fully rendered avatar. I think I've seen some very effective social virtual experiences that don't use them. That being said, I think if people who can do it well, and the folks who are working on doing it well, can create a superior experience. But take Oculus Toy Box, for example. I was fortunate enough to gone to Oculus Connect 2, and I was amazed by how much having the head and the hands and the live voice in real time got you feeling like I'm doing now. I'm talking with my hands. You were communicating with another person in real time, and that really felt like a person on the other end, mostly because you could hear their voice and it was happening in real time. But the head and the hands were giving you enough of a feeling that that other being was there, essentially in the same space with you. So I thought that was very effective, personally.
You can kind of unravel the question a different way, which is, or the way I think about it is, if we are all going to go into virtual worlds for different reasons at different times, we're going to want to have some sort of durable identity that comes with us, right? And then you can ask the question, which is I think one of the interesting, daunting, as yet to be figured out challenges of all this, which is how are we going to make us all into avatars? Are we going to do that, Sim style with some sort of a creator tool, or are we going to have some photogrammetry scan of ourselves as a starting point? There's a bunch of interesting questions that are asked there, and I think it kind of comes down to that. Like, what will we accept? What will someone starting out accept as a reasonable sort of likeness of them, given that they're going to have to sort of generally use it in the same way that we're using our bodies right now, to represent ourselves. So it's an interesting problem. And of course, the trend in Second Life was toward photorealism. Part of the reason for that, though, is that you don't have a lot of morphological animation going on with Second Life. We're not trying to move the mouth. We're not trying to move even the body parts, except to execute predefined animations. And so it's easier to create a photorealistic representation of yourself when that representation doesn't have to be highly physical and complex and moving, and it doesn't have to talk with its face. And of course, making its face talk is this uncanny valley problem. So it's a considerable set of interesting problems.
All right, so this is a very binary question, yes or no. Audience, please raise your hand as well. Realistic avatars and the future of social VR. Crucial, yes or no? Crucial, yes, to photorealistic avatars in social VR. It's crucial to the future of social VR. And then everybody else doesn't think it's so crucial. So that's interesting. I mean, avatars are something that people talk about a lot when we talk about social VR and how we're going to bring them in. And apparently people don't like the idea of looking exactly like themselves in VR.
I think what Philip highlighted is self-expression is crucial. Self-identity is crucial. Do I identify with this representation of myself? I think that's really important. I think that representation doesn't need to necessarily be photorealistic. I think everything you can add to the movement of that avatar that is realistic, mouth movement, eye movement, whatever it might be, that's going to add to the experience. That's going to deepen the experience. But that it be represented exactly as you see another person across from you, I don't think that's necessarily so crucial. Your brain's pretty good at interpreting the signals and knowing that what's coming out of a person, knowing what they're trying to express.
Right, so visually, yes. Let's talk about audio, though. Audio is a very interesting problem in virtual reality, especially social experiences. Traditionally, we're used to having just a phone that has the audio coming out of it. We're watching video, whether it be on Snapchat or on Facebook or wherever we are. But audio is this huge problem in social VR. How are you guys solving or approaching solving audio in VR so that it's not just, if we were to have this experience in VR, how can it be like this and not everybody yelling over each other?
Well, I think on the hardware side, standardization of audio inputs, embedding these microphones in the headsets, having some normalization, people have consistent volumes and a lot of background going on, addresses part of the problem there to begin with.
What about on the software side, when you're actually in there with people? We've talked about this a little bit, Philip. How are you guys solving the audio problem?
Yeah. Well, our name, and I mean, a lot of our work, the first work we did a couple years ago was all audio, actually. We started with a simple kind of jack-in-the-box head for that movement of the head. And I do agree that the movement of a sort of jack-in-the-box head is adequate to convey all kinds of expression, for sure. We started with audio, and we started just attacking. We started with this supposition that audio matters kind of with everything a lot more than we think. And so we kind of went down that road, and we continue to go down it. And I think we've done the best. We've done some pretty amazing work. But there's a ton of problems. One is that from a bandwidth perspective, if everybody here is going to talk in this room at more or less the same time, we need to manage the bandwidth. We don't need to all get streams of audio from each other. That won't work. There's this issue of 3D audio. There's a ton of different things you do to make audio sound three-dimensional. It's a huge field, a whole bunch of different decisions you can make. You want to have at least some of that stuff working really, really well because we use it to, for example, hear when two people are talking at the same time. In the real world, this is why you hate speakerphones, is because if you hear two people talk at the same time and the other end of a speakerphone, you can't understand them. You have to ask them to say it again. The reason for that is that your brain uses localization information. It actually uses a lot of stuff, but it basically uses a whole bunch of information gleaned from what you're hearing to separate the two individuals spatially and kind of cognitively so you can understand them. So you want to do exactly the same thing in a VR environment, if at all possible. And that's what we're working on. Then the other thing about audio, which has been the big thing that we beat up on, I mean, we talk about a lot, is latency. Traditional, even voice over IP systems have way too much latency. That's why we don't use our cell phones anymore. They have a half second of latency, which is useless for having a great dialogue with someone. And so from the very beginning, we took on this problem of can we cut up the audio into small enough pieces that we have very low latency relative to what we need to talk. So yeah, I go on for hours about audio. Love it.
I want to talk about privacy for a second. Social networks, we're used to signing up in 2 clicks. We click that terms of service agreement that we all sign our lives away whenever we sign up for something. What are the concerns around privacy in social VR, and what do you guys, who owns what happens in social virtual worlds? When we're on Facebook, when we share something publicly, it's out there, but what if we're in a public room having a private conversation in social VR? How do these privacy issues get considered when you're building these applications?
I think it's a really complicated problem. I was having a discussion with somebody about this the other day. I think all we can do right now is use guiding frameworks, and the framework we use is that we think that activities in social VR should be a lot like in real life. So when you are in a public place, there's an expectation of a certain lack of privacy in a public place. There's also an expectation of, because right in that terms of service is conduct and behavior, right? So in a public place, there's an expectation of behavior, and there's an expectation of ramifications of that behavior being outside the norms. By the same token, though, there should be an expectation of privacy when you're in a private place, right? And that should be an allowable thing that people aren't going to take pictures or record you or record that data necessarily. I think the devil is, of course, in the details, right? So whose definition of a public space do you use? Do you use the state of California or or France or Italy? I'm sure they're different everywhere you go. Ditto on privacy, whose expectations you use there. So I think, there's an idealized view that there's going to be some kind of, democratic system of government that's going to elect to have the privacy rules of everything in social VR. I think that we're a little ways off from that. And so I think that the only thing that we can do in the near term is try and optimize around what we think users are really going to need and want and desire out of our products.
Yeah, Philip, how did you approach moderating in Second Life? Second Life has, a million users. Ebe, the current CEO, is telling a story of how there was 2 avatar males dancing in someone's private nightclub in Second Life, and they wanted to kick them out because it was 2 males dancing, and they didn't want that. And they, of course, hit up Second Life, who has to play like the feds, the police, the law and order of everything that happens in it. What do you do in those situations to moderate?
It's really interesting, and it's driven me to think a lot about what we're doing with high fidelity in contrast to Second Life. Second Life is 40,000 servers with 1 million people in there, and those 1 million people are from all over the world. The United States Second Life usage is something like 33% or something. So it's really broad. So 2 people get in a fight on somebody. 2 people go into a server, and they get into a legal dispute over copyright. One of them is from one country, and another one is from another country. Whose law prevails? You could say California's, because say Second Life is a company, in California, but it doesn't make a whole lot of, common sense if you think about what's ultimately going to happen. So there are a lot of disputes like that are very difficult to resolve. Some of them almost pretty much impossible. We couldn't in Second Life set standards which were like the lowest common denominator for every country in which people were accessing the system. So it was very, very difficult. I believe that once we see social VR systems sort of at maturity, they will be deployed in some sort of a manner more similar to the internet itself. That is to say, there will be many servers with many different rules and codes of conduct on them, appropriate to, like Eric said, the public versus the private scope. Our personal bet with high fidelity is to build an open source system that in which you are running the servers, not us, and to kind of do that from day one. That might be too ambitious in terms of casting a bit farther out in the future, but I think in the end it will be that way. There's no question. It's going to be like a website. Do you think of all websites as having standards that they have to set or that they have to meet? Not really.
Actually, thank you for the fantastic lead-in, because that's exactly how we deal with it with Janus VR. In terms of both privacy and moderation, it's as open as the web itself. There's no central body or authority who's responsible for it. In fact, you don't even need to register at janusvr.com. You can just immediately start using it. You're somewhat anonymized to begin with. So the identity is the one that you kind of present to others. But very much like the web, you have these different servers, the different regions of the web that have their own rules. This component is open source, so people can actually, if they want authentication, or they want to do this, this tracking, you worry about privacy. We have some basic analytics to track like session length, the HMD you're using, things like that. But you could be really insidious and like actually record absolutely everywhere you're looking every moment. If you have some kind of advertisement, exactly how all that's going, and that's actually just subject to where you are on the web. If that's what they're doing with the server, they can add that. It's open in that way. So it's like self-regulation, I guess.
There's another aspect to this, and I'm a big believer in open and all that, so don't get me wrong, but the stakes are also a little bit higher here, right? You can actually create VR experiences or content that can potentially harm someone, right? Make them sick or traumatize them. I mean, the worst that ever happened with griefing attacks in Second Life was flying genitalia, right? It was on a flat screen and nobody cared, right? But in VR, you could potentially create something pretty hazardous, and so that's an interesting area we've never been in before.
Yeah, so user-generated worlds, like open versus closed. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Janus, High Fidelity, you're open. Anybody can come in and build. But Eric, AltspaceVR, you're closed.
Ish.
Yeah,
we've got an SDK for the creation of apps that run inside the environment, but the environments and the avatars right now are closed. And the reason we did that is that in VR, you can make people sick pretty easily. And so we wanted to make sure that we had really tight control on the performance requirements. And we were attempting to set a pretty low bar as far as what the GPU requirement would be. Now, Oculus, of course, has set their own minimum standard, which is pretty high. But in the early days, it was really important to us to make sure that we ran on lower-end PCs, on PCs that people actually had. and that's carried through to what work we're doing on mobile. And so I think that's going to serve us well there, because it's really hard to build an environment that runs well on a Qualcomm Snapdragon 805 right now, and also looks good on a desktop PC. And so I think once we know really how to do that well, we'll start to talk about having third-party content, but we've wanted to make sure performance is optimized first.
So in social networks today, there's a lot of focus, right? Instagram, you share pictures. Twitter, you have these real-time updates. Snapchat, it's very ephemeral. But success in social VR, or not social VR, I'm sorry, success in social media, building an application has been focus. What are your guys' focuses? And why did you choose to focus on that right now, this early on?
By focus, I interpret this as, what's your vision? What are you aiming to do? In the case of our own company, we want to bring out the immersive web. So what I mean by this is the internet is this amazing platform already that's in existence, culturally transformative. And then you have VR that's promising to be this emerging platform of the future. How do you combine the two, but in a way that's more effective than just taking that content on the 2D rectangle and bringing it into a 3D space? I don't think that alone leverages all that's great about VR. So our company vision is about kind of reimagining the interaction and the representation of the web itself, and how you can build upon all that existing content to turn the internet into these rich, immersive VR environments.
So let me rephrase the question, because I think focus might have been the wrong word. What are your users going to go in and do in your experience tomorrow, this year? Why are they going to you, and what are they doing once they're there?
Teach, learn, build, simulate experiences that we couldn't have done without VR, and start getting in there and doing them. As a broad answer, though, I think that there's an interesting question right now that I bet a lot of people here are thinking about, which is it the sort of casual, lightweight, mobile, fast thing, or the Phil Chan, who was just up here, was saying it elegantly. He said we're focusing on the deep, the full, the highest quality experience. Is it going to be that? Having thought about it a lot, my own bet is that it's the latter. It's the sort of more deep experience, enabling people to have experiences that would cause them to use these early class of devices quite a lot. In other words, give people experiences where they're getting a benefit out of using the early hardware that is really high. Now, sometimes just meeting somebody new, that is an example of a human benefit that is enormous. But I think that it is much safer to believe that the first stage of devices that are coming out here will be useful in contexts where they deliver a lot of value to us as users, because we're going to have to suffer. We're going to have cables coming off of our heads, right, to put these things on, rather than to think that we're going to kind of have this, Facebook-like, man, it only took me 30 seconds and I was blown away and I'm in. That's not going to happen next year. Yeah. So I think we're focusing on building capabilities into our platform that would enable you to do things together that are really quite remarkable. We're building a broader feature set because we believe it's going to have to happen. It's going to be big things people are going to do first. So I think.
Yeah, that's really well said. I think the way we like to think about it is what do we do together in person in real life that the online analog is lacking, and those are the use cases that we really look like. I would argue that being at the conference today, because of the impromptu interaction, because of the feeling like you're all connected together in the room, like we're all here together. There's an emotional impact. Like I would never on a video chat feel, wow, it's cool to be sitting next to Philip as it is right now. That online is lacking. A video stream of this is lacking. A YouTube video of this is lacking as compared to being here right now. And so we're looking for use cases like that, where we can draw people together in virtual space, that they get that same emotional reaction. They feel the same way that they do when they come together like this. And so for us, it's things like meetups is a really big popular thing for us right now. It's people, 20, 30, 40 people coming together to see a presentation from somebody. It's things like playing simple social games, board games, tabletop games, that sort of thing is really interesting, where it's mostly about the social interaction and partly about the other content.
I actually saw a great example of this, a startup company out of the Boost Accelerator with Janus. It's called Balula, where they have a virtual world all running in a browser, by the way, and it's pretty good. You should go check it out. WEVR for the world. Anyway, Balula is very focused on sporting events. They think people watch sports together a lot. So they've built these worlds that you can go visit where it's all about watching a Warriors game together on a big screen TV. And there's an avatar of Stephen Curry, 30 feet tall, in this virtual space they built. So they're really dialed in. They're really focusing on specific types of event venues and bringing those into a virtual world first.
Yeah, Live Like is another good example of that for sports viewing. Who had their social VR idea? Raise your hand if you had that social VR idea. And your
Pitch time.
pitch. Let me hear what you. What is your idea? Give it to us in under a minute.
That's great.
Stand up and let them have it.
All right, so I tried the AltspaceVR, and the one thing that I was thinking about was while I was wearing it, I wanted to look down at my phone and check my Twitter and organize my Facebook and do all my social stuff without taking off my headset. So I want my avatar to have my phone so I can do all that stuff.
Yeah. That's cool.
We've already got that.
We've heard that. We've added a bunch. The phone notifications integration is something that comes up all the time. We've got the browser functionality in there, which brings some of it in, but you're already logged into everything with your phone. And so, yeah, there's some cool technologies. I think they're more obviously exist for Android than iOS that bring some of that stuff into the desktop environment. I think it's early for us on that yet.
Yeah,
Who else? Anybody else have either their own idea or something they'd like to see in one of these gentlemen's ideas?
So to rip off an idea that first appeared, I think, in Doctor Who, the whole notion of "Hello, sweetie." So this is more in the realm of fiction, but the idea is to make it more social as well. So it's not just a pure interactive fiction type of scenario. So the idea is some people go back in time, plant some things in the world. Other people have to go and find it, but it's less about the story. It's more about the social interaction.
Interesting.
Cool.
Anybody else? Take one more if you guys have something.
So I don't want to give away, too many ideas, but I will mention something that I had mentioned at Oculus Connect 2. And I've been spending a lot of time in the social VR app, which I think is actually really fun. You're trying to watch movies in there, and obviously a movie experience is not actually social. You want to watch the movie, and people are talking over each other. So one of the feedback I gave them was being able to position emoticons above your head during the movie, so you don't have to interrupt anybody. It's minimal distracting, but at least you can still communicate. And so when people take the time to look around, you're still able to communicate with them. So it's a bit of a passive communication, which I thought was really strong.
Sorry, man, we got you by 2 weeks. We launched emoji 2 weeks ago.
I remember saying that.
Let's talk about women. Women on social networks, they're by far much more engaged and active than men. Instagram, Facebook, what have you, Snapchat. But women in VR is there's not many of them, at least that are willing to jump in, strap a headset to their head for hours. How are you going to keep women engaged in social VR?
Yeah.
I'm looking for the woman panelist to answer that one. She must have stepped off the stage.
The problem is especially important. I think because, for example, Second Life. In Second Life, women use Second Life more on an hours basis than men do. But more interestingly and more importantly, they're at the center of control and kind of dominate almost all of the sort of industry and commerce and everything that's going on. This is an interesting fact and a very important one. And so I agree. As we've all started building all this stuff, I say the same thing all the time to my coworkers, which is, where are the women and how are we going to get them to come and start working as engineers on this and working as users of it? Because none of this is all going to happen without women using these devices. And if there's something inherently wrong with VR hardware, for example, in the way women want to use it, we all better get smart about that pretty quickly and start moving.
Mm-hmm.
Any women in the audience have ideas, problems? Yeah, what's up?
Microphone?
I think for women, it's not about putting on a headset and interacting for a long period of time. When I'm on social media, it's 2-3 minutes of my time. I'm working on opening a virtual reality arcade in Portland because I think that's where you're going to get the women bringing their teenage sons in and wanting to relate to them and trying it and saying, hey, this is really cool and fun. So I think it's more being in a physical social space.
Social.
Any other? Yeah, right here.
I think, as you said, it's a shorter experience. It's not about spending hours being sequestered in this space, but the moments that you get to share with other family members that maybe are distances away, bringing people together in the context of family or friendships, and being able to share experiences with each other, or to maybe even be engaged in a virtual experience and then share that moment with other family members in a way that you have had an experience together.
Yeah.
Valuable insights.
I think it's fair to say that this problem is only going to get more challenging over the next year, though, because if you look at where, so a lot of the marketing in this industry is going to be driven by the hardware manufacturers, and the hardware manufacturers are largely going to go towards gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Gaming is not exclusively, but especially on the PC side, largely male, young. And so the big push is going to be, hey, this is a gamer-centric product. And I think it's up to us, really, if we care about this, which we all, I'm sure, really do, to not steer into that skid, right? I mean, if this is the direction that everything is going, we've kind of got to pull back the other way, which is hard because that's where our early adopters largely are going to come from, if those are the people who have the hardware. And so I think this needs to be front of mind in companies for sure.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. So I want to save this to the end, but I think it's important to talk about, but not important enough to give 20 minutes to. But let's talk about monetization. It's early, right? I mean, there's not even headsets out in the market yet, and there's not going to be that many sold in the first year by comparison to where we're going to be in 3. When is it safe to start thinking about monetization, and how are you going to do it?
Sure. I think actually monetization's interesting when you tie it to social VR, because social VR, to me, is a lot about the creative impulse. I mean, Philip was just touching on this a little bit with the women creators and drive Second Life in that economy, right? And when you have a social system where people can create and share experiences, you now have another monetization incentive, assuming there's some economy built into that. So you can have in-app purchase. People can sell each other virtual goods or rent virtual spaces. That becomes a driver of more adoption. You get people motivated to create stuff they can show off that they can ultimately sell, and now you're actually building monetization into your model earlier than you might think. And you might not collect a lot of coins in the first few years, but you've built it into the beginning. You've built the structure of it around people creating and merchandising their content. I think that's going to be a big driver of it. So I don't think it's too early to be talking about that right now, but I'm not building a monetization back end for a system because I'm not building a system right now. So I'd really like to hear what these guys have to say. We're in the trenches.
Yeah, me too.
I think as soon as it benefits the user. So I think that's when you should be thinking about monetization angles that provide value to the user. And so like one example that we bring up all the time because we think it just makes sense, and so we'll probably end up doing it sometime soon just because it's so obvious, is that we have these events. We have meetups. People go to meetups and hear speakers, and I think people probably paid to go to this conference, right? And so there's clearly a market for people going to hear people talk about things and see exclusive content like that they couldn't necessarily. And this is a great example where the people that come to the event are very willing to pay for it. The third party that's running the event probably would like to get paid, and we as the kind of facilitator of that transaction are happy to facilitate it because everybody's happy. And so I think this is a great example of where doing something like that brings value to our users, and so that's a place where we would monetize in the early days. I think where you'll see us shy away from it is things where we're just doing the things that I think are expected of U.S. consumer internet companies, monetizing your eyeballs. I think that's going to be a dead end early on in VR.
Definitely, I agree. It resonates with me, the idea that it empowers the users, or it's a benefit to the users. I think when you're surrounding yourself by people who can benefit from your technology or platform, that you're doing a very good thing. So monetization will be around how can the creators, the site developers, make money themselves, and get revenue from being a developer on your platform. And in addition, I know we have a tradition, or just borrowing all the analogies that kind of work on the existing web, right? So you think of how advertising is done. It's natural extension, this idea of advertising. But on a VR platform, there's new potential for more experiential forms of advertising. It's one potential direction. Another is sort of the paid-for premium content. The idea that you'd either get a subscription or a password or sort of an e-ticket to some sort of service or experience out there on the web. So many of these traditional models, just as they extend onto the Janus platform, is what we're looking at. So,
well, I think the most important thing to think about monetization overall is just this simple observation. If we enable people to build inside these worlds, if people are able to build things, and if they have a means and a mechanism to sell those things to each other, let me say that monetization for all our companies will be very simple. And let me defend that. In Second Life, there's about 1 million people. They generate collectively in transactions for digital goods amongst themselves close to $1 billion or $1,000 per person per year in transactions. So as an operating company, if you can provide some utility to those people, which enables you to capture even a small fraction of those transactions, you're going to be fine as a company, which is our intention. But I think the broader wow about that is, remember, people made 3D content, a lot of 3D content with a mouse and a keyboard, really, really difficult. If people are able to use these devices that are coming out to make content, okay, it's going to be fun for them to do it, and they're going to make it at 100 times the speed that they've made it thus far. Totally. And so think about the collective size of that market, like how much stuff we're talking about. And I guess the companies that make this stuff work are going to be the companies that are sort of sitting on the channels and the distribution pipes and whatever around all that stuff. But it's the stuff that's going to matter, and even anything. Well, anyway, I think once this all gets going, we're all going to be fine as companies. The question is all the design challenges of actually making it work so people really can build things and sell them to each other.
Marketplaces are going to be huge in social VR.
That's what we're trying to do.
All right, final thought from you guys would be, what's your counterintuitive, half-crazy prediction for where our industry is headed in the next 5 years? Something, who cares if they think you're crazy? What do you think is going to happen in 5 years that we just can't really consider now?
Well, I bet Eric and I probably have probably the same answer. I'm not just ambitiously say, but I mean, the end of business travel is a considerable thought. It represents, business travel for work represents, there's this DOE thing, I think it represents either 8% of our GDP or 8% of our energy use. 8%. This is a big number of a GDP. If it's GDP, that's $100 billion. It's close to $1 trillion in transporting ourselves around to have meetings and do work. What if, in 5 years' time, this technology was good enough that had substantially changed? That's just good times. I mean, to see something like that happen, that's an enormous set of industry dislocations. That's the one. And I think it's doable in 5 years. I mean, I think we got it.
The one I like, which has fairly little relevance to our businesses, but is around TVs in homes. As you look at the quality of stereoscopic head-mounted displays, and you look at how quickly that's going to go up, it'll be really in the second generation, maybe probably in the third generation of headsets, that for most people it'll make more sense to buy a $200 or $300 HMD than to buy a $1,000 TV in their house, because the effective quality of that screen will be higher now. And so it's not so much necessarily of an impact on the U.S. because we all already have these gigantic TVs and our whole homes are built around them. But if you look at emerging markets, this is, I think, one of these concepts where, just like the cell phones skipped landlines, they'll probably skip giant flat screen TVs and just go right to HMDs.
Interesting.
5 years?
5 years.
hundreds of millions of people will be having spiritual or religious experiences in VR. They'll be going to a church, mosque, synagogue, whirling with dervishes, or meditating with Deepak Chopra.
Yeah.
Kind of counter to the idea of the strength of having an identity, I think we might have something akin to like VR chat roulette, where you'll want to have a specific experience with someone else where you don't want your identity to be known. So sort of like VR speed dating type of application or something like that in the social space would be one prediction. That'll be a
whoever
thing.
makes the Tinder for VR.
Yeah, something like that.
Very rich.
Like a fat,
man
yeah,
or
you don't know
woman.
me, I don't know you, but you know.
So we got about a minute left. Anybody from the audience have any questions they want to toss up? Any thoughts?
I have something I'd like to see as a feature in one of the social VR apps. So feature. So you have your HMD on, right? You get a notification from your phone. I got something came. I want to be able to go. I want that sound effect too. And to have actually my phone come up, an RDP, like Terminal Services image of exactly what's on my phone. So I don't have to get out of the experience. And you guys can't see it, but I can see it. And then I can interact with it. I can type on it. So it implies kind of an app that would live on your phone that would emulate terminal service wise.
So
That's two. I guess we better get cracking.
I've actually spoke with people who work at Google about this very idea, and it was about not using Janus VR as a platform just for viewing websites, but actually as like a platform that ran Android apps on it, and that was its own compositor, and you could do new things with the display there. So that'd be potentially really interesting to actually tie your phone, and certainly you would have to do something like running these apps natively though to get that experience there. Just
Like terminal service, where it just sends the lump, takes the bits, and it just sends like a fake mouse click.
oh, I see. So you do some plumbing then to
Other questions? You got the mic over there?
Yeah, Phil, you actually brought this up in Seattle, or you touched on this in Seattle. What do you guys believe the hyperlink is going to be that's going to link different worlds in VR? Is it going to be voice, or is it going to be like a little icon like cardboard or a door? I don't know. What do you guys believe it's going to be?
He asked you, Philip.
Oh yeah, he did.
No, I just said
You
you
guys,
touched
yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Do you mean technically, or you mean
What's the user experience?
representationally, or
Yeah, it could be visually, it could be technically. I mean, what is it gonna?
Let's try to
I don't
keep
know.
our answers short if we can. I know it's.
technically, I think the hyperlink is the hyperlink. I think we're going to use the web to figure out how to route you to different virtual places. I think it's just I think it just makes the most sense. There's the most tools built around that.
And it's going to depend very much on the nature of the environment. How the experience is designed in that particular environment as to whether I, tap on a door at a portal somewhere, or I get floating icons over something as a, gaze-based hotspot if I'm looking at a particular area of interest. I think it's just like any website today. There's a lot of different ways to hyperlink from one place to another. Right.
There's something to be said, though, to provide a consistent interface, though, between experiences, just to ease the learning. I've actually implemented the doorway system myself, and I've found it elegant for reasons of context preservation, allowing seamless traversal between the environments. But
Yeah, first stage VR has challenges with locomotion, so walking through things is not as easy. But I do think that the visual metaphor of the door from one place to another is so compelling to us that we're no doubt likely to see that used in a lot of cases. I kind of think it's likely, as Tony said, to be the click, just the basic click to transfer from one server to another. Certainly an action taken. Hopefully you have a button in your hand or something. Or walking through things where it's appropriate, where people are actually walking. I think walking through is compelling. We've tried them both.
You're going to get tired of doing a lot of walking, though. That's why I personally believe it's going to be a mix of those.
Yeah. All right. If you're excited for social VR, applaud. If you think it's gonna ruin us, boo. That's good. All right. Thank you to all the panelists for jumping up here with me, and thank you guys for the questions and the insights. I'm really excited for what's gonna happen. Next year is gonna be crazy.
Cool.
We're going to see stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we're gonna see something right now.